You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
Good afternoon, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday has rolled around again. That means it's time for Cello Chat. And I'm excited to have with me today Dr. Zachary Preucil. Zachary, how are you doing?
Good. Very busy this summer. I have a lot of different projects going on, but I'm happy that we're at a point where this is possible again, and it's not just sitting behind the screen.
Yeah, it's a nice problem to have. Excellent. Well, as a way to lead up to these summer activities, can you tell about your background and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Well, I grew up in suburban Chicago, and I come from a musical family. My father is also a cellist. He's in the Lyric Opera Chicago Orchestra. And my mom is a violinist, and she has quite a large teaching studio that she just runs right out of the house. So growing up, I was exposed to music all the time. And I decided to play the cello just because my dad did. And when I was 2 years old, it was kind of silly, but I thought that all boys played the cello and all girls played the violin because that's what I saw my parents doing. So like it or not, my fate was sealed. Although it was not a, sort of inevitable thing that I would go into music. In fact, for most of my childhood, I was very much indecisive about what I would ultimately end up doing. And I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, I had to give a speech on my future career path. And I was actually interested in journalism at that point. So I researched it and I had all these articles. It was things like, journalists, they often have to skip meals and work long hours. And I was like, I'm not interested in that sort of lifestyle. Little did I know, right? And so then that summer I went to Interlaken and Van Cliburn came. This was towards the end of his life, actually. This was 2006. And he played the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto with the orchestra as sort of a throwback to his success at the competition in Moscow. And then I was doing Schubert Cello Quintet in a really good group. And I was like, okay, I could do this. I was really into the intensity of it. And I really wanted to just explore all of the great music that was out there. Because my whole life, I'd, hear snippets of things like, the Strauss, Death and Transfiguration, the Frog Sonata. I'd be like, what are these pieces? I have to figure those out. So then I started practicing much more. And I wound up at the New England Conservatory for undergrad, studying with Yi-Sun Kim of the Borromeo String Quartet. And when I was there, my first year, I just lived in the practice room. It was pretty bad. My father came to visit me in Boston, and he knew more about the city than I did just because he had read the guidebook on the plane. I didn't even know where the subway station was nearby. It was embarrassing. And so then my second year, I wanted to get more well-rounded, so it wasn't just the cello all the time. And I decided to join the student newspaper, which was called The Penguin, by virtue of the fact that musicians tend to look like penguins when we're in our tuxedos. And that actually ended up being a really cool experience because I started thinking about broader issues related to classical music in terms of audience engagement, music school curriculum, music school experiences, and how that leads people on career paths. And I would also really enjoy the feedback I got from students and faculty on the articles I was writing. So that kind of started to get me thinking a little more outside the immediate path of just performance. I realized I wanted to do something beyond that. So I was actually co-editor of that newspaper for a couple years. And then I did my master's at Eastman and joined the arts leadership program there, which involves courses in entrepreneurship and things like how to build your own ensemble, how to write grants, giving you extra musical skills that you can use for different types of projects. And of course, my major was cello performance still. And I studied with David Ying there of the Ying Quartet, and got to meet a whole different set of teachers and students and make new connections. But then after Eastman, I was sort of a little bit adrift and wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. If anything, I was kind of burnt out after 6 years at 2 intensive conservatories. So I decided to come back to Chicago because I still had a lot of connections. And I had begun teaching when I was in Rochester. I taught at the Canucks School and I had a teaching assistantship. And I knew that I definitely wanted to do something with that. And so in Chicago, I ended up teaching for a couple different programs, including more significantly at the Music Institute of Chicago. And I was doing that for a few years mainly teaching, not so much performing, just because I kind of got filled up with students, and then I realized like there's not much room for gigs unless you're willing to have the cost of a lot of annoyed parents having to reschedule all the time. So after a couple of years, I began to think more about what I wanted to do for the future. And I started to feel like teaching in a college eventually would be something I'd be interested in. And I also felt like, I wanted to have more lessons, and I wanted to, continue to develop as a musician. And so that's what brought me to Madison to do my DMA, because I was really interested in working with Uri Vardy, who just retired here. And he leaves behind an amazing legacy. But, he took me as a student, and he was really one of the best teachers I've had, because he works on more than cello playing. He really develops you as a person. And I was really fortunate to be able to work with him for 3 years and experience a lot of self-growth and personal discovery. And also in Madison, it was a very different type of place than where I'd been before. East Coast conservatory setting is nothing at all like Midwestern state school. And so just the types of people I met here, and the types of professional work I was doing, and the types of opportunities I had were quite different. And that's where I still am here in Madison. And a lot of the things I'm doing now, I started when I was still doing the DMA program. I finished right as the pandemic was starting, which was not great timing. But fortunately, I had been involved in things outside of UW. So I'm now a principal cellist of the Crosse Symphony, which is in western Wisconsin. It's a regional orchestra, so I don't commute there all the time. It's just once a month, but it's a wonderful gig, really wonderful group, and I really enjoy the opportunities I've had there. I teach privately at a program here. I also teach online at Virtu Academy, which is a purely online program, which we can talk about in a bit. I co-direct a chamber music program here for pre-college students. And this year I've started doing some work for the International Cello Institute, which I know has been previously discussed on this channel. Anna Clift was here. This summer I'm going to be directing a program for them for cellists ages 9 to 13 called iConnect, which is going to be both in person in Davenport, Iowa, and online. And I'm also going to develop some initiatives for like pre-professional students and do some work with some college students there and high schoolers at their main festival. Because last year I got involved with them as a teaching fellow, which was a really great experience, even though it was all on Zoom. So I'm doing that. And then I recently formed a piano, clarinet, cello trio called Trio des Éléments. And we have some concerts coming up. So needless to say, I always just get up in the morning, start working, and then finish working and go to bed, basically. There's not much time for much else, but it's all great. And like I said, I'm happy to be able to be doing this stuff right now, and that we're at a point with COVID and everything where this is all possible again.
Yeah, it sure is great when you love what you do.
Yes.
All right. Well, a number of things to talk about. But let's start with the question about motivation, the things that you do, your favorite go-tos to get people in the habit of practicing, where they see the joys of practicing. What are some of your favorite devices along these lines?
Right. Yeah, well, this is the question that we all deal with as teachers. And I find that motivation in the end has to be intrinsic. It has to come from the inside. And so to that end, I really try to understand exactly how my students are perceiving a lesson situation and how they're perceiving practicing. Because sometimes we can make assumptions as teachers, like, oh, well, they're not into it, or, oh, like they're really busy. But oftentimes there's something more there, like they may feel badly about their playing, or maybe they previously had a teacher who would yell at them if they didn't practice and it was really negative, and then they kind of got discouraged from it or whatever. So I'm always just asking questions, like when a student comes in, I'm just off the bat asking, well, how's everything been going? And sometimes I hear other things like, oh, the power went out yesterday, and I had a soccer game and all this stuff. But then we get into a discussion about, well, how was your phrenology? you going, and what were some challenges perhaps that came up, and sometimes they're still not very descriptive, but then once they play, I'll ask them about specific places, like, well, how did you practice this? Like, what were some things you were focusing on? And if the answer is, well, I didn't really practice it, then we'll talk about that. Okay, well, what is getting in the way? Because I think sometimes students can feel very overwhelmed, especially in high school when they have APs and sports and, they're just so packed with their schedule. Or again, they may feel like, I'm just not that good or whatever. And it's important to really see exactly what those fundamental causes are, and then address them with the students. So I might help them make a plan, like, okay, when are you free? 4 to 4:30. That's when you'll practice. Here's how you'll do it. If they're having self-esteem issues, I'll remind them that, it's just playing an instrument. You don't want to think about yourself as being good or bad. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think it makes a big difference, because what we're doing in the end is conveying something that's on a page, and that can still be somewhat effective, even if you don't have the technique of Yo-Yo Ma. So I try to use words like, I thought that was mostly effective, or maybe that was not so effective. Here's how it can be more effective, because then people feel better about themselves, because no one comes up to you and says, Benjamin, you're an ineffective person. Right? They'll say, oh, you're a great guy. You're a good person. And so I just feel like those are better descriptors. And just like the language I use with students, I think makes a difference on how they perceive how I think of them. And then that kind of helps them feel more empowered. And then the other thing too is making sure that they have a clear plan of how to actually address an issue on the instrument. Because, when I first started teaching, I would just tell them, okay, practice it this way and do it this many times, perhaps do it the metronome, isolate a shift, think about the preparation, all this stuff. And I thought I was pretty clear. And they come back and it was clear to me they did not take it in at all. And because sometimes, you have to realize as a teacher that, you're a very experienced cellist in our case, and things may seem very obvious to you, but to a student who's never really tried this before, like depending on how they're focusing at the time, or how they're perceiving things, how they learn, they may not get it at all. So you really have to almost ask them to kind of show you how they will practice, and give them tools so that if they get frustrated, they can take a step back and draw on certain things, because practicing in the end has to be a constructive activity. I feel like too many students, if they do get to the practice room and they've been motivated to practice, but it's not going well, they feel lost. And they feel like, oh, I'm just not good at this, And I have students who express those things. Sometimes there's a lot of live commentary. They're playing through the piece. Oh, that was bad. Oh, I didn't get that. I'm like, okay, but those aren't helpful thoughts, right? Let's address it. Why did you not like it? And how can we fix it? That's all it is. So you really have to put it in perspective for them and give them not only the physical tools, but the psychological tools. And I think that's all very important.
I like that. There's a number of very good things in there. I'm reminded of the, it was a long time ago, but working with a group you were in and moving from D major to D flat major.
Yes. I was just thinking about that.
And how in, I don't know, it's a little bit different. Students, different reactions. And of course, when you're being able to work with them one-on-one, you can go straight to what they need. It's a little bit different in a group class. But I think in some cases, having that series of goals like that, okay, I want to play as well in 5 flats as I do in D major and 2 sharps. And then as they're heading towards that path, you're even just the comment, the way of saying it, of not being a good or bad, but effectiveness is sometimes all it takes is a mindset change like that.
Absolutely.
And then the route becomes manageable, and you don't beat yourself up along the way, and you know what you're trying to accomplish, how you're going to get there, and why you're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And that D flat major story, I think about that every time that I kind of recall that retreat, because D flat major was not one of our required scales for Illinois All-State. So we knew all of the required ones.
Right.
But, I don't know, maybe nobody's teacher had really enforced it with them or whatever, but we were all sitting there and I think we had done D major. It was all great. You said, all right, now we're doing D flat. And we were just like deers in headlights. And you're like, you got to know D flat major. But I'm happy to report, Benjamin, that I know my D flat major scale very well, 4 octaves, 6, the whole thing, and I teach it to all my students. But that was a good lesson, because it's like, okay, well, maybe this is a harder key. Maybe you don't need to know it for All-State, but I mean, composers write in D flat major, so we have to figure it out.
And even some of the things that we kind of take for granted, I think, about some students, the way they listen for intonation, the sympathetic vibrations that you'd get in a D major or a G major, and you have to listen to a key like D flat differently because of the lack of sympathetic vibrations. Anyway, it's always interesting, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
All right, well, let's definitely. I am very curious to hear your not only your thoughts on how your approach to things like the Virtu Academy and iConnect, but how they came to pass. Let's start with Virtu Academy.
Well, so believe it or not, Virtu Academy started before COVID. And it was founded by a couple of students from Oberlin. They won some business venture competition over there. And their whole idea was they wanted to democratize music lessons so that people, even if they weren't in a big city or came from a position of wealth, could have access to really high quality music education. And Zoom was around by that point. They were using Zoom before it was cool in 2018. But it was really just getting off the ground, as I understand it. And then I came across it in June 2020 because I was in dire straits. I had 4 students in Madison, did not know if my orchestra would be playing, and my chamber program, of course, was on hiatus. So I was trying to figure out a way that I could support myself. And I came across the site because I just searched for online music lessons, and it actually seemed very legitimate. I mean, some of these ones are not quite so much, but it's very well run. Like they very much vet their teachers. Like I had to do an interview and all this stuff. And I noticed one of my colleagues was teaching there, so I asked her about it, and she was like, "Oh, it's great. All you have to do is turn on the computer, and they take care of everything else." And as it turns out, when I interviewed, they told me, they said, we had hundreds of teachers apply when COVID started, and we've had a significant uptake in students. So they were one of the few music organizations that really benefited from the whole situation, because a lot of people are just turning to music lessons for comfort and solace, back during quarantine. And so it took me a while to get started on there, but I've been teaching for them now since January 2021. And it's really great because, people sign up from all over the country, and it can be young kids, although I say it has to be at least 10 years old for me because, I find it a little difficult to teach like 4-year-olds online because of the way you have to communicate with them. But some people do it. And I guess there are some ways that, Suzuki teachers especially have found. But I've had everyone on there from 10-year-old beginners to even some like retired adult students who actually played the cello when they were younger and actually were quite serious about it and that are coming back to it now. So you really see the whole gamut of background and experience and different reasons for coming on. And they could just sign up whenever. It doesn't need to be a weekly lesson, although some people do that. And then I just get a notification. I don't have to worry about scheduling or anything. I just put in my Google Calendar when I'm free. And so I get a text like, "Oh, Jimmy's coming on Tuesday at 3:00. I'm like, okay, great. So then I just turn on the Zoom, teach the student, and that's it. And it's very convenient when you're an active performer because, sometimes I'm out of town and I can't be teaching, but I can set aside a couple hours in the hotel where I can still teach these students. Or like if I'm really busy, I can just block off the week, and there's no commitment on my end to be teaching at the same time every week. So it's a great way to have some additional teaching work while I'm doing other activities. And I think it works well. The only drawback is you can't really play with the students, although maybe we're getting there in terms of the technology. But I found that pretty much everything else can be taught and understood just as effectively. The only thing is you have to ask more questions. Because sometimes it's not entirely obvious on the screen what a student is experiencing physically. Like you can kind of tell, but sometimes camera angles, like I'm always asking them, can you lower the camera so I can see at least your bridge and what's going on with the bow? But if the connection isn't great or if the lighting in the room isn't great, I may not pick up on certain things. And that's actually really helped me grow as a teacher, because I start using some of the same tactics in my in-person lessons as well. And that gives me more information, because I'm assuming less and I'm really hearing more what the student is experiencing, and I'm starting to observe more common patterns. Like, oh, okay, they're feeling tight here, so that's probably because of something that's going on with how they're sitting, or how they're using their arm, or whatever. Because sometimes, like, the other thing too is in-person lessons, I still don't do any sort of physical contact with the students. Before COVID, I did that with permission, because Uri Vardy was a Feldenkrais practitioner, very much into that stuff. So it kind of rubbed off on me, and I was all into helping them feel the loose weight and doing all these sorts of exercises. But now we're still maintaining distance and mass and everything. And so I've had to figure out, both online and in person, how to get the students to experience things without me helping them. And I feel like that's gone well, but it's really, it's forced me to think a lot more about stuff. So yeah, I think, in the end, in person is probably slightly better, just because you can feed off each other's energy. And I do feel like my in-person students, for the most part, it's a little easier to make a personal connection. But at the same time, the fact that we can use this technology, I think, is a very positive force in a lot of these people's lives. And that's what's important. Because I have some people come on and they tell me, their Virtu Academy lesson is the highlight of their week. And I'm really honored to be the facilitator of that.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And then the iConnect through the International Cello. Yeah.
Well, so that started with an intern they had there named Daniel Knapp, who's at Oberlin Conservatory. And they had somebody write to them from Venezuela, actually, and say, are there any opportunities for students my age? And so last winter, we had an online session, and we involved that student and some others, and it was just sort of a test run. But, it was basically sort of like more mentorship and less of an intensive lesson experience, because these were kids like 8, 9, 10 years old, but they were all actually well along. Like, they were playing unaccompanied Bach and stuff. I was quite impressed. And I had finished my teaching fellowship, and Anna was working with me to find ways I could stay involved. And so she asked me to kind of head up this program. And basically what it is going to be is for both in-person and virtual, there'll be regular lessons. So it's a little bit more substantial now. We're going to have some guest clinicians. Laura Shaw from the Preucil School of Music is going to be coming in. We're going to have, for the in-person one, ensemble experiences, other types of technique classes. And it's basically designed to inspire. And the kids will also have access to all of the things that are going on at the ICI general program. And so they'll get to see, people playing a master classes for the principal cellist of the Boston Symphony, that sort of thing. And I think that's so valuable at that age, because I remember when I was 12, 13, I definitely, even though I grew up in a very musical family, I didn't really know what the broader cello world, the broader musical world was like. And, of course, we're not trying to churn out the next group of prodigies to head into Curtis. We're really just trying to get these kids an experience that gets them outside of their immediate musical community and meet new people and meet other people who are also equally as passionate about learning the cello and learning music.
That's excellent. All right. And then I'm still thinking along your use of technology. You have also, you have some videos of some of the things that I think that you performed on Wisconsin Public Radio and then some teaching videos too, particularly related to the right hand. You,
Oh,
do you
yeah.
use those for just for like supplementing what you're teaching to your students, or just as a little demonstration of your teaching approach?
Sometimes, although those videos were initially made for other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones you saw, so I did play a WPR a few years ago, but that wasn't a video. That was just an audio recital. I made several videos for the Crosse Symphony during quarantine, where there was like a theme, and you see me with my quarantine hair in the back of my apartment. It's not exactly the most professional looking setup, because there wasn't more we could do at that time. But that was designed to keep engaging the symphony audience and sort of giving them a chance to get to know the musicians more personally by hearing about our backgrounds and experiences and stuff. I made a video for Farley's during quarantine in an effort, again, to keep engaging students. Farley's is the program I teach for in Madison. And then the bow arm video I made for the Credo Music Festival as part of one of their YouTube series. And I had just done a presentation on that for ICI. And so I thought that might be a good topic. So, it's mainly sort of being invited to, create some pedagogical things and just kind of showing what I'm about. I mean, 10 years from now, I might look at it and like, oh, well, that's not how I teach it now. Hopefully it won't be how I teach it in 10 years. I hope I continue to grow. But I do use those sometimes, in lessons, just, as a reference point for students. It's like we're working on the concept, and I might mention, oh, well, I made this video for Credo last winter. It's the same stuff. How about you go and take a look at it? And I've thought about doing more, because I think it's important for all of us to just keep sharing ideas. I never got this idea of teachers kind of keeping their tricks close to the chest. It's like, come on, you guys, we're all working towards the same thing. No reason for it to be a secret. But now with things like Cello Bello and all these great online resources, I think we are moving into a phase of great sharing of knowledge. And I'm happy to contribute to that.
Yeah, I think so. I think, ASTA, American String Teachers Association, they got that ball rolling. And I think particularly in America, it's just been more and more in that direction. It's nice to see Australia, their String Teachers Association, the ESTA, European String Teachers Association. Like what you say, we're kind of, if we take that attitude of we're all in together to advance the field of string teaching, and if we can make it to where we're all as effective of teachers as possible, that only helps us to generate more people who are interested in learning the joys of playing a string instrument, and showing them how they can really make it their own and be as natural at it as possible in as little time as possible. And it's all good.
Yeah, well, because, for me, I think a lot about the future. Like, where is this all going? And I think classical music, for understandable reasons, we tend to be very focused on the past, both in terms of the repertoire that we play and also the way that we teach, the way that we sort of present ourselves. But, my paternal grandfather, William Preucil Sr., turned 91 this year, and he's still teaching.
Wow.
And he just a couple students in a chamber group, as I understand it. But, he was viola professor at University of Iowa, played in Stradivari string quartet. And, when he turned 90, I wrote to him, I said, gee, Grandpa, if I make it to 90, it'll be the year 2080. And boy, wouldn't that be something to teach a cello lesson in the year 2080? Just think of what the world will be like and what the purpose of being a musician will be at that time. I feel like it'll be very different than it is now. Just in my lifetime, I've seen so much change, particularly in the last, few years, with the pandemic and how that's influenced things and, what's going on in the rest of the world. So that's really where my mind is, in the end, what are we trying to accomplish for the world around us, and not just for ourselves? Because that's what I want my legacy to be, what I did for other people, and not necessarily like, oh, he, went to some fancy school and won some competition. That's only really important to me. What's more important is that some kid in the future will remember having an inspiring experience with me in a cello lesson. Like, if that ends up being the case, I'll die happy.
Excellent. Oh, those are very inspirational words. Now, but we have to talk about this this trio. I think
Yeah.
interesting. The cello world, we love playing orchestral music, and we have lots of solo stuff that's great. But the chamber music world is so rewarding too. I think, of course, the main thing that catches our attention is the string quartet repertoire, or the traditional piano trio of violin, viola, and cello. Violin, cello, and piano. But sorry, my brain was already moving towards where there are several pieces for flute and cello piano, and then also some very beautiful pieces for clarinet and cello and piano. And you have put together the latter ensemble. Yeah. How did that come to pass?
Well, it's kind of a long story, because before the pandemic, we had a wonderful new clarinetist come into La Crosse Symphony named Sarah Manasreh, who's the professor at UW Stevens Point. And we kind of got to know each other through our gigs there. And we were doing a kids concert one day, and we got to talking, and she said, hey, I'd love to do some stuff with cello. And it's like, oh yeah, no, let's keep talking about it. And then 2 months later, of course, it was lockdown. So we kind of just went on hiatus for a year and a half. And then last fall, I got back in touch with her, because now she was finally back in the symphony. We did strings only for a whole year, basically. And I said, hey, would you still be interested in collaborating? And she's like, yeah. And she said, I'd love to do some of the great trio repertoire. So then I brought in another colleague of mine, Katherine Petersen, who teaches at Music Institute of Chicago, where I used to teach. And we were actually an undergrad together at NEC. We were in a chamber group right away. Freshman year, and she played for my freshman jury, and we've done some recitals together. And she's a phenomenal musician. She's one of those collaborators that, she's so professional and so smart, and she'll also just tell you like it is. And she really kind of helps her collaborators grow along with her. And Sarah's the same way. So it's like, we all have to get together. The thing is, with all of our schedules, it was a while before we were able to actually arrange an in-person meeting, because we're coming from different places. But now this summer, it's finally happening. We're really excited. We got on the Rush Hour concert series through the International Music Foundation in Chicago. That's going to be the day after Independence Day, July 5th. And then we're doing a couple concerts here in Madison. One is sort of invite only. It's at a house. But the other is at a Catholic church here. And we're called Trio de Éléments, which is a reference to the diversity of elements that we bring to the music with our diverse instruments. Because that's the thing about playing in a clarinet trio. It's very kind of disparate, the different voices that are there. So that presents both a great challenge, but also a great opportunity for expression. So we're really excited with everything we're putting together. We're going to be doing the Louis Ferranc trio, which is beautiful classical work, and then the famous Brahms clarinet trio. So I'm practicing my high F sharp in the second movement. Find out of nowhere, maybe put a little Scotch tape up there. But we recently put up a Facebook page, so I would encourage viewers to go and find us. And if you're in Chicago or Madison week after the 4th, check us out.
Terrific. And I think it's very fascinating to play with clarinet in terms of the way it makes you think about the use of vibrato, when playing with them. And also how blending the timbre is just different enough in the 3 different registers for clarinet that the way to fit inside their sound kind of feels a little bit different. I don't know if you think that or
not. Absolutely. No, I mean, it's a really revealing experience for sure. Like even coming down to matching intonation, ensemble, because when a clarinetist breathes, it takes a moment before the sound actually happens. So you can't really follow their cue the way that you would with a violinist. And the vibrato question is something that we've already discussed quite a lot. And actually, I'm still doing what I typically do for the most part, because it adds a nice contrast and it can work well. The only thing is, when you're doing a unison or something, you have to be careful because, the clarinetist isn't going to be vibrating. And so you have to make sure that you're not distorting your pitch. So I'm not going to be going crazy with it when we have something together. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a really cool experience. And I'm really fortunate to have those colleagues to work with.
Yeah. And they can taper with us out into nothing. That can be
and that's really, Brahms makes full use of that in the way he writes music, like the end of the first movement where we're just on that low C sharp. It's really, especially in a really resonant space, which fortunately we have a couple of those we're going to play in. It really, it's such a unique instrument. So I've been learning a lot.
Excellent. All right. And other projects, performances coming up in 2022?
Well, yeah. I mean, the trio, we're hoping to do some more stuff. I've been talking about doing a cello duo concert with a colleague at Bemidji State University, but stay tuned about that. I don't have details. Of course, lacrosse and everything will be starting up again in the fall. I mean, I'm definitely quite busy with everything I'm doing between ICI and my programs in Madison and my online work, because I'm sort of recruiting for everything, and getting interest in everything, because it's all very new, the ICI program and the trio, and then different chamber workshops we do here in Madison. So it's hard to add too much more into the mix. But I'm fortunate though, because some people, and I was in this place too, kind of get locked into one thing, or that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I find it really enriching to be doing a variety of stuff, because I couldn't just be performing all the time, and I couldn't just be teaching all the time. As much as I feel like teaching is really where I most belong. I think Starker, he famously said that I can't do one without the other. And that, as soon as he got on the tarmac in Bloomington, or Indianapolis, then that's when he became the teacher. Then when he left, then he was the performer. And it's really true, because when I'm having a nice balance of things, then both of them benefit. So that's sort of where my focus is right now.
Outstanding. I love it. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time and your thoughts, Dr. Preucil, and best of luck with everything, all that you got going on. It sounds exciting and fun.
Yeah, it is, for sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Benjamin. Bravo to you for all these fantastic interviews. It's a wonderful resource for all of us.
Well, thanks so much. All right. Till next, our paths cross. And for everyone else, happy practicing all weekend, and we'll see you this time next Friday. Take care.
And do that D flat major scale.
Yeah, amen.